A waitress secretly feeds a mute boy every day. One morning, helicopters land in front of her diner. A millionaire walks in, and the bell above the diner's door gave a soft chime as the morning rush began to trickle in. Cold air swept across the tiled floor, curling around the legs of chairs and whispering through cracked window panes. Grace stood behind the counter, refilling the coffee pot, her hands moving with the ease of routine, but her eyes flickering constantly to the corner booth by the window. Liam was there, just like every morning. He sat with his knees tucked close, his oversized hoodie swallowing his thin frame, his eyes staring quietly out the window, as if waiting for something the world had forgotten. He never spoke, never ordered, never moved much, just sat, still and silent, like a shadow that only she could see. Grace reached under the counter and pulled out a wrapped sandwich, scrambled egg, ham and cheese on warm toast, and a paper cup of milk, gently steaming. She placed them on a tray with a folded napkin and walked across the diner. As she set them down in front of Liam, he looked up, his eyes dark and tired but never unkind. He gave her a small, slow nod, his version of thank you. She offered a soft smile in return, then turned to walk back. Before she could make it behind the counter, she heard the voice she had been dreading all morning. "Grace, we need to talk." Carl stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, lips drawn into a tight line. His white apron was stained with grease, his thinning hair slicked back like he was going to war. Grace followed him silently into the back hallway, where the sounds of sizzling bacon and clinking plates faded into the buzz of the refrigeration unit. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Carl hissed, keeping his voice low but sharp. Grace crossed her arms. "Feeding a child. With food that is not yours," Carl snapped. "That sandwich could have been sold. That milk costs money. He is not a paying customer." "He's a hungry boy," Grace said evenly, "and he shows up here every morning in the cold, alone, silent. Do you even know his name?" Carl shook his head. "It's not my job to feed strays." Grace's eyes hardened. "He's not a stray, he's a kid, a human being." Carl leaned in closer. "Listen, this is a business. We're barely scraping by as it is. You want to hand out free food, do it on your own time." "I am," she replied. "Every morning, before the rush, one sandwich, one cup of milk. That's all." Carl exhaled, frustrated. "You keep this up, Grace, and we're going to have a serious problem." Grace didn't flinch. Her voice dropped, calm and certain. "Then I guess we already do." Carl stared at her, his mouth a thin line, but didn't respond. He turned and stormed back into the kitchen, muttering under his breath. Grace stood there for a beat, her heart pounding, hands shaking just slightly. She walked back out to the counter, trying to steady her breath to keep moving. The bell above the door chimed again as a couple walked in, and the clatter of plates resumed. But her eyes drifted to Liam. He was eating now, slow, methodical bites, like he was trying to make the meal last. His fingers, small and pale, gripped the sandwich with quiet reverence. The milk sat beside him, untouched but warm. Grace wiped the counter without looking down. She glanced up only once, catching his eyes again. There was something in them, something deep, not fear, not sadness, something harder to name. Recognition, the kind that said, "You saw me, and you didn't turn away." She looked back down, swallowing the lump in her throat. Every morning he came, always at the same time, always in the same hoodie, sometimes wet from rain, sometimes shivering from wind. No one else noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. Customers had commented, "That kid gives me the creeps. Why does he just sit there? Is he even allowed in here?" But Grace never responded, because she knew that silence. She had worn it herself once. When she was a girl in foster care, shuttled from home to home, eating quietly in corners so no one would ask questions, and someone had once noticed her too. A kind woman who ran a shelter. She gave her a bowl of soup and a warm smile. She didn't ask for a name, just offered a place to sit and food to eat. That moment had never left Grace. It had saved her. And now, maybe, just maybe, she could return that gift. Carl walked past her again, glaring. She didn't flinch. "Why?" he muttered. "Why risk your job for a mute kid who doesn't even say thank you?" Grace turned to him fully this time, her voice steady, clear, and louder than the question demanded. "Because no one else will, and if no one cares, then I'll be the first." Carl didn't reply. He just shook his head and disappeared into the kitchen again. Grace turned back to the counter, picked up the notepad, and began taking orders. But her heart beat with quiet defiance. And somewhere behind her, a boy watched through the glass, and for the first time in a long while felt seen. The rain came hard that morning, hammering the diner windows like impatient knuckles on glass. Gray clouds pressed low over the town, and water pooled along the sidewalk like silver veins. Inside the diner it was warm and bustling, filled with the clatter of plates and the hum of early chatter, but Grace wasn't smiling. She kept glancing at the window, at the corner booth, at the door. Liam wasn't there. For the first time in over a month, his seat sat empty, no small figure huddled in an oversized hoodie, no quiet eyes peeking through the fogged-up glass, no gentle nod, nothing. Grace stood frozen behind the counter, her hand wrapped around a fresh sandwich she had already made, the cup of warm milk beside it untouched. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the tray down and looked again. Still nothing. She tried to push the panic down, to tell herself maybe he was late, maybe he was somewhere dry, somewhere safe, but the gnawing in her gut said otherwise. Grace began receiving drawings from Liam a couple of weeks ago, simple at first. A house with smoke curling from a chimney, a red heart with uneven edges, a stick-figure woman with long brown hair and a kind smile. She had cried over the first one, tucked it into her apron like a prayer. Each morning after, there was a new one waiting beside his empty plate, folded neatly, drawn in crayon. They never had words. They didn't need to. They said more than Liam ever could, and now, with the booth empty, it felt like part of her had gone missing too. She poured coffee for a table of regulars, but her hand shook and the cup overflowed, spilling onto the saucer. "Hey, Grace," Carl barked from the kitchen doorway. "You all right?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the door. She set the pot down and walked slowly to the window, wiping away the condensation to get a clearer view of the street. Still no Liam. "Grace," Carl said again, louder. "Orders are stacking." "I'll be back," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She untied her apron, tossed it onto the counter, grabbed her coat and pushed through the door, out into the cold. The rain hit her like a sheet of ice. Within seconds her coat was soaked, her hair plastered to her cheeks. But she didn't care. She ran, down Main Street, past the bakery, the bookstore, the shuttered movie theater. Her boots splashed through puddles. Her breath came in hard, sharp gasps. "Liam!" she shouted into the downpour, even though she knew he couldn't answer. He wouldn't. She checked behind the flower stand where he sometimes lingered, behind the grocery store's delivery crates. Nothing. The wind howled, and water ran in rivulets down her face, like tears she couldn't feel yet. She tried the alley behind the diner, the old bus stop where he'd once drawn a rainbow on the back of a transfer ticket. No sign of him. "Liam!" she called again, her voice cracking. "Please!" She ran down back streets, checked under stairwells, peered behind dumpsters. Each time her heart sank further. She was soaked to the bone, shivering, but her feet wouldn't stop. She couldn't. 45 minutes passed. She was about to give up, to collapse in a pile of rain and mud and helplessness, when she rounded the back of a laundromat and froze. There, huddled in the narrow space between two dumpsters, barely visible in the gloom, was a small figure. Liam. His hoodie was soaked, clinging to his frame. His knees were pulled up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. He didn't look up as she approached, but she saw the paper in his hands, a drawing, blurred and bleeding color, half dissolved in the rain. "Oh God," she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Liam." He flinched when she touched him, then slowly turned his face toward her. His lips trembled. His eyes, those wide, dark eyes, were filled with something more than fear. Shame, like he thought he'd done something wrong. "No, no, no," Grace whispered, pulling him into her arms. "You don't have to hide. You don't have to be scared." She felt how cold he was, his skin like ice beneath the wet fabric. She clutched him tighter, burying her face in his shoulder. "You don't have to go anywhere," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not alone. You're not invisible." He didn't speak, but he clung to her now, tiny fingers curled into her coat like he was holding on for dear life. She leaned back just enough to cup his face in her hands, brushing away the rain and strands of wet hair. "You don't have to go anywhere else," she whispered. "I'm here." He looked at her, blinking slowly, and for the first time she saw it, a flicker of relief, the beginning of trust, the smallest seed of hope. She pulled off her own coat and wrapped it around him, then gathered him into her arms, lifting him gently. As she carried him out of the alley and back toward the diner, she held him tighter than ever, like he was something fragile the world had tried to throw away and she had chosen to save. The rain had stopped by the time they reached Grace's apartment, but the world was still soaked in silence. She carried Liam up the narrow stairs to the second floor, her coat wrapped tightly around his small frame, his head resting against her shoulder, his fingers still clinging to her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Her apartment was modest, just a kitchen, a small living area, a single bedroom, but it was warm, filled with soft light and the scent of cinnamon tea she had brewed earlier that morning. She placed Liam gently on the couch and went to the bathroom, running the tub with warm water. He didn't resist when she helped him out of his soaked clothes, didn't flinch as she tested the water temperature, didn't speak or move when she gently guided him into the bath. His silence was not resistance. It was something else. Trust, maybe, or exhaustion, or both. She sat beside the tub, rolling up her sleeves, washing the dirt and rain from his arms and neck with slow, careful motions. He watched her, eyes steady, saying nothing. She smiled softly as she poured water over his head. Afterward, she wrapped him in a fluffy towel, dressed him in one of her old t-shirts, and set a tray of warm soup and toast in front of him. He ate slowly, methodically, like every bite was something sacred. She didn't press him. She didn't ask questions. When he finished, he curled up on the couch, and she sat in the armchair nearby, a blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the city glowed amber and gray, street lamps flickering to life as evening descended. She watched him for a while, then said softly, "You remind me of someone." Liam looked up, his gaze curious. "I had a little brother," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Noah. He was 5 when he died." She swallowed hard. "I was supposed to watch him that day, but I got distracted, just for a few minutes. He followed the neighbor's dog out into the storm. By the time I realized, it was too late." Her fingers twisted the corner of her blanket. "He was quiet like you, sweet, always drawing pictures of trees and rockets and dinosaurs." She looked at Liam then, her eyes misty but gentle. "I think some part of him still lives in me. Maybe that's why I noticed you. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk away." Liam held her gaze for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into the small notebook he always kept in his pocket. It had survived the rain, barely. The pages rippled and soft. He opened it to a fresh page and picked up a crayon from her coffee table. She watched in silence as he began to draw. It was simple but powerful. 2 stick figures holding hands, standing in front of a little house. The taller one had long brown hair. The smaller one wore a hoodie. Beneath them, he drew a heart. Grace felt her throat close up. Her eyes sung. He turned the notebook toward her and waited. She reached out and touched the page, her fingers trembling. "Is that us?" Liam nodded. She smiled through the tears. "It's beautiful." He set the notebook in her lap, then leaned back into the couch, eyes heavy. She tucked the blanket around him and let him rest. As he drifted to sleep, one hand remained outside the blanket, reaching gently for hers. She took it. In that moment, Grace understood something she hadn't allowed herself to believe before. She wasn't just feeding a hungry boy. She wasn't just sheltering a lost child. She was becoming something more, not by blood, not by title, but by choice. She was becoming his person, his safe place, his home. It was barely past dawn when the sky over the sleepy town rumbled with something strange, something loud, foreign, and commanding. The sound built quickly, a low, mechanical roar that seemed to ripple across the streets like thunder rolling over rooftops. Grace stood behind the counter at the diner, refilling sugar containers, her morning just beginning. But she paused, her hand frozen in midair. The rumble grew louder. The windows began to shake. Chairs rattled on the floor. And then it happened. With a blast of wind and an explosion of sound, a sleek black helicopter descended slowly, powerfully, into the empty parking lot just across from the diner. Its polished steel shell shimmered beneath the early light, a symbol of something much larger than this town had ever seen. Everyone inside the diner stood still, stunned. Forks dropped. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. A child pressed his face against the glass, eyes wide with awe. Even Carl, usually grumbling behind the register, stood slack-jawed at the door. The helicopter landed with precision. Its blades slowed, chopping the air into sharp gusts that kicked up leaves, dust, and gasps of disbelief. Then came the next wave. 3 black SUVs pulled up seconds later, flanking the helicopter. The doors opened in unison. Men in tailored black suits and earpieces stepped out first, scanning the area with alert eyes and military precision. One of them spoke into a small mic clipped to his collar, then gave a curt nod. The diner door chimed. No one turned to look. They were all too busy watching the parking lot unfold like a scene from a movie. The back door of the middle SUV opened slowly. A man stepped out. He wore a charcoal gray coat over a crisp, dark suit, his hair streaked with silver, his posture tall, unyielding. His presence carried weight, not just of wealth, but of command. He walked with quiet certainty, each step purposeful, measured. There was no need for introductions. The authority radiating off him was unmistakable. Michael Thorne. Every local in the diner knew the name. Tech billionaire, CEO of Thorne Enterprises. A man whose face had graced magazines, news segments, and financial journals. What no one could understand was, why was he here? Grace stepped out from behind the counter, her eyes locked on the scene unfolding through the front windows. Liam, who had been seated quietly in his usual booth, stiffened. His hand gripped his crayon tighter, his body shrinking instinctively into the corner. Michael Thorne stopped just outside the entrance. One of the guards opened the diner door for him. The bell chimed again. This time everyone turned. He stepped inside. Silence dropped like a curtain. Every eye followed him as he walked to the center of the diner floor. He paused, scanning the room, his eyes sharp yet clouded with something else. Urgency, exhaustion, grief. Then he spoke. His voice was low, but every syllable rang clear. "Is there anyone here?" he said slowly. By the name of Liam, the room fell still. Grace's breath caught in her throat. No one moved. No one spoke. Except Liam. The crayon slipped from his hand. His body trembled just once. His eyes, wide and terrified, turned to Grace. She moved instinctively, stepping in front of his booth, shielding him with her body without a second thought. Michael's eyes found her. Their gazes met. In that single moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. Her soaked coat from the storm still drying by the door. The drawings she kept tucked beneath the register. The silent bond she had built with a boy who never spoke. Michael looked at her, and softly, his voice now quieter, almost breaking, he asked, "You've been watching over him, haven't you?" Grace didn't respond right away. She looked at Liam, who nodded once, barely. Then she turned back to the man. "Yes," she said. "He's safe." Michael exhaled, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for years. "I've been looking for him," he whispered. And every person in that diner understood. They were witnessing not just the arrival of power, but the breaking open of something far more human, a father's heart, desperately seeking his son. The diner emptied within minutes, not by command but by instinct. Patrons knew when something larger than themselves was unfolding. Grace, Michael, and Liam remained. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the windows like distant memories. They sat in the back booth now, Grace on one side, Liam beside her, half hidden in the crook of her arm. Michael across from them, his hands folded, eyes fixed on his son with a look that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. He looked older than his photographs, not in the way of time, but in the way of grief. "I should have found him sooner," he began, his voice calm but frayed at the edges. "We were in the mountains just for the weekend." Liam's nanny stepped away for a moment. A dog startled her. She slipped, hit her head. When she came to, Liam was gone. Grace held her breath. "We searched immediately. Helicopters, drones, search parties. I hired every expert, every tracker. Days turned into weeks. There were no sightings, no footprints. It was like he vanished into thin air." Liam sat still, his hands resting in his lap. He wasn't drawing now. He was listening. Michael glanced down at the table. "His mother passed 2 years ago. Cancer." Liam was different after that. Quiet, withdrawn. But he still spoke. Until that day. He looked up at Grace. He hasn't said a single word since he disappeared. Grace felt Liam shift closer to her, his small fingers curling gently into hers. She squeezed back. "I never stopped looking," Michael said. "I never believed he was gone. Then, about a week ago, a non-profit I fund, an art therapy organization for at-risk kids, received an anonymous envelope. Inside were several drawings. One of them was unmistakable." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat. Grace recognized it immediately. It was one of Liam's first, a house, a heart, and a woman with brown hair, smiling. "He was trying to tell us something," Michael said softly, "and it led me here." Silence fell between them, soft and heavy. Then slowly Liam turned to Grace. His eyes shimmered, wide and vulnerable, searching her face for something even he couldn't name. She smiled through her tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." And then it happened. Liam shifted in the seat, wrapped his arms around her waist, and buried his face in her side. A sound escaped him, a breath, then a sob, then finally words. "Me, Mom." Grace froze. Liam clutched her tighter, shaking now, his voice breaking but real. "Mom? Grace." Tears spilled from her eyes as she wrapped both arms around him, holding him close, whispering into his hair. "I'm here. I'm here, baby." Michael stared, stunned, his jaw clenched. He stood slowly, his hand covering his mouth. His eyes were full now, brimming with unshed grief, awe, and something else, gratitude. He looked at Grace, not as a stranger now, but as something far more, the woman who gave his son back his voice. Grace met his eyes over Liam's head. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Everything was already said. The next few days passed like a quiet dream. Michael didn't rush anything. He didn't press Grace with plans or take Liam away in a flurry of luxury and power. Instead, he stayed. He checked into the inn across the street from the diner. He came in every morning, just after sunrise, and sat at the counter like any other customer. No bodyguards, no press, just a father, watching from afar as his son sat at his usual booth, next to the woman who had brought him back to life. Grace noticed the way Michael watched Liam, not with control or possession, but with reverence. He was discovering his child again, one moment at a time. She also noticed the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, quietly, kindly, gratefully. On the third morning, Liam greeted them both with a drawing. It showed the three of them, standing in a park beneath a tree. Liam in the middle, holding both their hands. Grace's figure had her signature ponytail. Michael's had a gray suit. Above them, he'd drawn a sun with a smiling face. Michael folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. Later that day, they walked together through the town's small botanical garden. Liam ran ahead, chasing butterflies, arms stretched like wings. "You know," Michael said, hands in his pockets, "I've spent the last 10 years building companies and ignoring the spaces in my life that needed healing." Grace glanced at him, cautious. "I thought I could buy safety, buy solutions, but I've never felt more powerless than I did the day Liam disappeared." "You didn't give up," Grace said gently. He nodded. "I just didn't know where to look." They walked in silence for a few paces. The wind stirred the leaves above them. Children laughed nearby. Birds chirped like background music to the soft unfolding of something new. "I want to take him home," Michael said at last. "Of course I do. He's my son. But I see the way he looks at you, the way he reaches for your hand before mine. You were there when I couldn't be." Grace opened her mouth to reply, but he held up a hand. "I'm not trying to take that away from either of you. I'm asking if you'd be willing to still be part of his life, not out of obligation, but because I think we both know Liam needs more than a house with gates. He needs people who love him the way you do." She looked at him, stunned. "I've been thinking," he continued, "what if we created something, together, a place for kids like Liam, a center where they can grow, speak in their own way, be safe, art, therapy, food, mentorship. You've already done it, one boy at a time." Grace hesitated. "Michael, I'm a waitress." "You're a healer," he said softly. "You're not replacing anyone, Grace. You're the one Liam chose." Her breath caught. "I have the resources," he went on, "but I need someone with heart, with vision. I need you." She looked toward the garden, where Liam knelt beside a bush, carefully drawing a flower in his sketch pad. She had found him on a rainy day, with mud on his shoes and silence in his throat. Now he was smiling. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Michael stepped closer, his voice low. "Just say yes. Not for me, not even for him. For you, because this is already who you are." Grace looked down at her hands, then at him. "You're not asking me to give him up?" "No," Michael said, shaking his head. "I'm asking you to walk with us, wherever this goes." She blinked fast to hold back the tears. "Okay," she said quietly. "Yes." Michael smiled, soft and full. "Then let's build something that starts with him, but grows into something so much bigger." And Grace knew then this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. 1 year later, the town had changed, but it was not the buildings or the streets that were different. It was the energy, a quiet hum of purpose, of hope. At the edge of the town, where an abandoned community hall once stood, now rose a warm, inviting space filled with light and laughter. Sunlight House. The building was modest but full of life. Murals covered the walls, painted by the very children it now sheltered. Laughter echoed from the activity rooms, where kids played with Legos and painted dreams. A garden bloomed in the back, tended lovingly by tiny hands and guiding ones. At the heart of it all was Grace. No longer just the woman behind the diner counter, she now wore her name on a badge. Director, Sunlight House. But more than the title, she carried presence. Gentle, attentive, endlessly compassionate. She greeted every child by name, remembered their favorite snacks, their fears, the colors they always reached for first when drawing. Michael had become a familiar figure too. He stopped in several times a week, sometimes for meetings, sometimes just to watch Liam paint or build with blocks. He never arrived with fanfare, no suits, no security, just Michael, quiet, kind, fully present. Their relationship had grown in silence and trust, no dramatic declarations, no public romance, but in the way his hand brushed hers as they walked through the halls, in the way he watched her laugh with the children, in the way she leaned into him during long planning meetings. They had become something quietly solid, and Liam had blossomed. He now spoke in full sentences, still soft but sure. He laughed easily. He took younger kids under his wing, helping them find crayons, pass out snacks, and draw what they could not yet say. His smile had become a kind of sunshine, warming everything around him. And on one particular afternoon, Sunlight House buzzed with even more joy than usual. It was Liam's birthday. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, streamers curled around banisters, and the scent of fresh-baked cupcakes filled the air. The children had worked on decorations all week. Grace wore a handmade crown of construction paper, a gift from the little ones. Michael had built a treehouse out back just for Liam and his friends. When it was time for cake, the room dimmed. Dozens of tiny voices began to sing, "Happy birthday to you." Liam stood in front of the cake, candles flickering, eyes bright. Everyone clapped, cheered, waited for him to blow them out. But he didn't. Instead, he turned, walked slowly to the center of the room, and picked up the microphone from the small speaker set. The room hushed. He cleared his throat. Then, in a voice clear and steady, he said, "Last year on my birthday, I didn't even have a voice." He paused, scanning the room. Grace stood near the back, one hand pressed to her chest. Michael stood beside her, his eyes glistening. "I didn't make a wish. I didn't think anyone would hear me if I did." He took a breath. "But this year, I don't need to wish, because everything I could wish for is already here." He looked directly at Michael. "I have a dad who never stopped looking for me," then at Grace. "And I have a mom who found me before I could find myself." He smiled shyly, eyes full. "I don't need to wish anymore, because I already have a family." Tears broke freely then, among the staff, the children, the friends watching from the corners. Grace stepped forward, barely holding it together, and wrapped her arms around Liam. Michael joined them, resting a hand on his son's back, then slipping his fingers into Grace's. Liam leaned into them both, laughing now as everyone cheered. In the distance, a new mural had just begun to take shape, a tree with wide branches and 3 figures drawn beneath it, holding hands. Sunlight spilled through the windows, and somewhere, quietly but surely, a family stood together, no longer found, but fully chosen. The week after Liam's birthday, Sunlight House felt more alive than ever. A spring breeze danced through the open windows, carrying the scent of blooming wildflowers. Laughter and music filled the air as children played beneath the newly finished treehouse in the back. The center had become more than a place, it had become a home. That evening, Grace stood in the garden behind the center, watching the sunset dip low behind the hills. Her hands were dusted with soil from planting new herbs with the younger kids. She wore a soft yellow sweater, her hair in a loose braid, cheeks flushed with joy and the remnants of the day's sunlight. Michael approached quietly, a box in his hands. He was dressed simply, no suit, no tie, just a man who had shed the weight of corporate kingdoms for something infinitely more real. Liam trailed behind him, holding a small bouquet of dandelions and wild violets. "Hey," Michael said gently. Grace turned, smiling. "Hey yourself." Michael took a deep breath and looked around. "I thought I knew what fulfillment looked like. Private jets, stock markets, applause in boardrooms." He stepped closer. "But nothing has felt like this, like watching Liam sleep without nightmares, like hearing your laughter echo through these halls, like watching a lost child walk through these doors and find hope." Grace's smile trembled, her hands pressed over her chest. Michael slowly lowered himself to one knee. The box opened in his hand, revealing a simple, elegant ring. Inside the band, a delicate inscription shimmered. "Where love found us, we stayed." Gasps and soft exclamations floated from the staff and children peeking through the windows. Michael looked up at her, his voice steady and warm. "Grace, you saved my son, but you also saved me. You brought me back from a life of loneliness and silence, just like you did for Liam. You didn't replace anyone, you became exactly what our hearts were missing." He reached for her hand. "Will you marry me and help me build a family where love isn't inherited, it's chosen, every single day?" Liam stepped beside them, slipping one of the wild violets into her hand. Grace's eyes brimmed with tears. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at Liam, who smiled up at her, his small voice rising. "Say yes, Mom, Grace." She laughed through her tears and nodded, kneeling to hug them both. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that, more than anything." Cheers and clapping erupted from the building. Children ran out, surrounding them with joyful chaos. Later that night, under the moonlight, the 3 of them stood before the newly carved wooden sign placed by the entrance of Sunlight House. Burned into the grain in bold, loving letters were the words, "The right family wasn't built, it was chosen." And just beneath it, smaller and in Liam's own handwriting, someone had carved, "We're not lost anymore." Inside, the lights glowed warm. Drawings lined the walls. Voices sang lullabies. Love had woven itself into every corner, and in the center of it all stood a woman who once poured milk for a silent boy, a man who once believed he had everything, and a child who now had both a voice and a family. Not perfect, but true, and that made it everything. Sometimes, the most extraordinary families are not born, they're built, one act of kindness at a time. Grace didn't set out to become a mother. Michael didn't expect to find love in a quiet diner. And Liam, he never thought he'd speak again. But in a world that often forgets the silent, the lost, the small, they found each other. They chose each other, and that made all the difference. Because home is not a place on a map. It's a hand held in the rain, a drawing left on a diner table, a whispered mom that says, "I trust you." And love? It's the decision to stay. If this story moved your heart the way it moved ours, please like, comment, and share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where real-life moments turn into unforgettable journeys, and every tale reminds us that healing begins with the simplest gesture. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay human, and stay with us.